Up on the 22nd floor of a glass high-rise in downtown Chicago, Maggie Foster's name meant almost nothing to the office crowd. Behind her back, they called her the old hag, even though she was only 37, and most of the department was just 5 or 6 years younger, tops. They laughed, whispered, exchanged smirks behind her back, and when she appeared, they suddenly got very busy. Maggie was used to it. Years of experience had taught her to keep her distance. No fake smiles, no shallow water cooler chats, no desperate attempts to fit into cliques that shifted faster than April weather. She showed up every day in sharp gray suits, perfectly put together, composed, always one step ahead on every project. And for that, they both hated and feared her. Too perfect, too serious, they thought, too uncomfortable to be around. Normally, Maggie took March 27th off. Every year, without fail, she gave herself the small luxury of spending her birthday alone, walking along the Lake Michigan waterfront, grabbing coffee at her favorite cafe, maybe picking up a new novel or a nice pair of shoes. But today was different. It was a Wednesday. There were urgent reports, an overflowing inbox. She couldn't afford a day off. Work always came first. As she made her way down the hallway to her office, Maggie heard muffled giggles behind her. Oh my God, she's wearing that gray blazer again. Thinks a serious face can hide her age? She kept walking, chin up, eyes forward, posture flawless, like she hadn't heard a thing. The steel armor she'd built around herself had long ago fused with her soul. When Maggie opened the door to her small corner office, it was silent. No balloons, no happy birthday signs, not even the token corporate card signed with the obligatory best wishes. Probably forgot, or maybe decided to ignore it on purpose, she thought, with a detached numbness that still hurt somewhere deep inside, like an old wound that never really healed. She set her leather bag on the desk, neatly arranged her papers, and powered on her computer. Just another day. Just another invisible day in her invisible life. Then there was a knock at the door. She looked up. Yes? Her voice was as calm and composed as ever. There was no reply. Instead, the door creaked open, and he walked in. Ethan Brooks, the new guy. He'd only started a couple of months ago. Young, with a warm smile and slightly tousled chestnut hair, he was the polar opposite of the rest of the office. Open, alive, a little awkward. In his hands was a bouquet. Not just any bouquet. A stunning, oversized arrangement of fresh white roses tied with a royal blue satin ribbon, and a huge box of chocolates in shiny gold wrapping. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. "Miss Foster?" he said, stepping closer. "Happy birthday." Maggie stood up, staring at him in disbelief. "Thank you, Ethan. That's really unexpected." She could feel her cheeks flush. When was the last time someone had done something like this for her? "I just thought it didn't seem right for a day like this to go unnoticed," he said, setting the flowers down on her desk. "If you're up for it, I'd love to take you out for lunch, my treat. There's a Harvest Cafe just around the corner." Maggie almost said no, automatically. Every instinct screamed, "Don't. People will gossip, they'll stare." But there was something in Ethan's eyes, openness, sincerity, that made her hesitate, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of loneliness mirroring her own. She smiled, a real, warm smile she hadn't used in years. "I'd love that," she said. As they walked together toward the elevator, a trail of stunned stares followed them. People actually twisted in their chairs, trying to sneak a look. One of the junior analysts even dropped his coffee cup, sending latte splashing across the floor. But Maggie didn't care. Harvest Cafe was a cozy place. Exposed brick walls, the smell of fresh bread in the air, soft country music playing in the background. They grabbed a table by the window. Ethan ordered cheeseburgers and salads, and they talked like old friends. The conversation flowed effortlessly, about books they loved, dreams that felt just out of reach, funny stories from their first jobs. Maggie laughed, truly, easily and brightly, the way she hadn't laughed in years. When the meal wound down, Ethan smiled wider. "How about a movie? They're playing Casablanca at the old theater over in Lincoln Park. You in?" Maggie froze. A movie, with someone who actually wanted to be with her. "I'd love to," she said. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. A small crack in her iron armor widened, letting in a little light, a little life. When they returned to the office after lunch, the whispering had reached a fever pitch. But this time, Maggie didn't care. For the first time in a long time, she walked the hallway feeling like she had every right to be happy. And somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, maybe this birthday was the start of something real. Ever since the day Maggie Foster and Ethan Brooks first left the office together for lunch, the vibe around the company had noticeably shifted. The whispers behind their backs grew louder, the stares bolder. It was like their relationship had become the biggest soap opera in an otherwise dull corporate world. In the break room, people gossiped. How long you think they'll last? I'm giving it a month. A week. She's way too uptight. He's got to be playing her. Maybe she's loaded or something. Every glance, every little smile exchanged between Maggie and Ethan got picked apart. But despite the toxic buzz, they held on to what they had. First cautiously, then unapologetically. For the first time in years, Maggie allowed herself to just be. Ethan chipped away at her walls without even trying, just by being there, holding her hand at the movies, making her scrambled eggs in the morning in her tiny kitchen overlooking Lincoln Park. Yeah, they were living together now. Ethan moved into her neat little 2-bedroom apartment about 2 months after that lunch at Harvest Cafe. At first, he only brought a couple of bags and a beat-up laptop, but little by little, his stuff started making itself at home. A leather jacket hanging by the door, sneakers kicked off by the entrance, a messy stack of books on the nightstand. Sometimes Maggie would catch herself thinking it was all too good to be real, like she might wake up and find it had been a dream. But every morning, feeling Ethan's arm draped across her waist, she knew this was real. Warm, fragile, terrifyingly real. Their evenings were filled with long talks, walks, movie nights on an old projector Ethan scored at some garage sale. Weekends were for biking along the lakefront, trying every hole-in-the-wall coffee shop they could find, reading to each other in bed. Every time the sideways glances at the office got a little too sharp, Maggie just squeezed Ethan's hand a little tighter. 6 months passed, 16 bets about their inevitable breakup, and not one had come true. If anything, Maggie and Ethan looked happier than ever. Sometimes the digs were straight to their faces. Didn't think Miss Foster was into younger guys. Jennifer from marketing snarked as she passed by. Maggie didn't even flinch. She just smiled and kissed Ethan on the cheek, right there in front of everyone, triggering another explosion of whispers. Let him talk. But as it so often goes, happiness can be a fragile thing. One ordinary Monday morning, while lazily stirring his oatmeal, Ethan said, "Mags, I gotta head out of town for a couple days. Some family stuff. I'll be back before you know it." She glanced up from the newspaper, frowning slightly. "Family stuff?" He smiled, that soft, easy smile she loved. "Yeah, just gotta check in on my folks. They're in Springfield. Nothing bad, I promise." Something cold brushed across Maggie's heart, but she pushed it down. She nodded. "Of course, just text me when you get there." Ethan kissed her on the temple. Wouldn't dream of forgetting. He grabbed his duffel bag and walked out, leaving behind the smell of coffee and fresh soap. The whole day, Maggie couldn't settle. She buried herself in spreadsheets and reports, but kept checking her phone every few minutes. Nothing. Evening came. Still nothing. Night fell. Silence. Her mind raced. Did something happen? Did he just leave? By the next morning, after a sleepless night, Maggie was a wreck. She drove to the police station, heart pounding. The lobby smelled like stale coffee and wet rubber, a chilly spring morning pressing in. A bored-looking desk sergeant with a thick mustache barely looked up as she spilled out her story. He shrugged. "Ma'am, we don't take missing adult reports till after 72 hours. Maybe he just needed space. Happens all the time after a little lover's spat." The words stung like a slap. Maggie clenched her fists, fighting the burn behind her eyes. "He wouldn't just leave," she said quietly. But nobody was listening. A week dragged by. Maggie showed up at work like a ghost, moving through her days on autopilot. The gossip swirled around her, but it didn't even register anymore. Nothing mattered. Her heart beat out one desperate thought. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? One morning, making coffee in the echo of their too-empty kitchen, Maggie flicked on the TV without thinking. And there it was, on one of the local news channels. Unidentified man found in critical condition after car crash. Currently in Springfield General Hospital. Authorities seek help identifying him. She froze. Through the bandages, the bruises, the blood, she recognized those eyes. His eyes. Ethan. The coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile. She didn't even notice. 10 minutes later, she was tearing down the highway towards Springfield, her old Toyota rattling with the speed, heart about to burst out of her chest. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, beeping machines, harsh fluorescent lights. And there, in a hospital bed, battered and broken but alive, was Ethan. For a terrifying second, she thought he didn't recognize her. But then, his eyes lit up. "Maggie," he rasped, voice rough, raw. She rushed to his side, holding back sobs. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm right here." His hand found hers, weak but warm. "I was on my way to see my parents," he whispered. "Was gonna ask for their blessing. I wanted to propose to you." Tears spilled from his eyes, from hers. "I love you, Maggie." She wrapped her arms around him as gently as she could, her heart breaking and mending all at once. He was alive. He was hers, and nothing else in the world mattered anymore. The rustle of sterile sheets, the soft beeping of machines, the low murmur of the nurse's voice, it all blended into a warm cocoon around Maggie and Ethan. The moment she saw the recognition in his battered eyes, something inside her cracked open, and then reassembled stronger. It felt like the world had found one more missing piece. Hours slipped by. Maggie never left his bedside, holding onto his hand, whispering to him about the days she spent without him, about how the city had felt so empty with him gone. Ethan listened, barely smiling, his face bruised and broken, his movements weak, but his voice was alive. "I thought about you the whole damn time," he rasped. "Through all the chaos, I kept looking for your face." Maggie tightened her fingers around his and whispered back, "I never let you go, not for a second." The doctor, an older black man named Dr. Peterson, always with reading glasses and a never-ending cup of coffee, explained that Ethan had a long road ahead. A few broken bones, a concussion, memory loss around the accident, but now, thankfully, his mind was clearing. "Your guy's one tough son of a gun," Dr. Peterson said, clapping her shoulder with a warm smile. "He's gonna make it." Maggie nodded, wiping away tears. That night, walking back to the cheap motel room near the hospital, the one that smelled like old carpet and desperation, she allowed herself the first real smile in weeks. He was alive. They were going to be okay. 3 weeks went by. Ethan joked that his walks down the hospital halls made him look like a drunk cowboy, but every day he got a little stronger. He cracked jokes with the nurses, spun wild stories about his high school days, and sometimes just sat with Maggie in peaceful silence, their fingers laced together. Every evening, she brought him his favorite coffee from Dunkin', vanilla syrup, just the way he liked it. Every morning, she'd read headlines off her phone, dragging out even the dullest stories just to hear him laugh. The hospital had become their own little world. They started dreaming out loud, road tripping down Route 66, getting a dog, buying a fixer-upper with a big front porch where the mornings smelled like coffee and fresh toast. Sometimes Ethan looked at her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "You know you're my shot at something good, right?" he said one afternoon, tracing circles on her palm. Maggie didn't even hesitate. "I'm not going anywhere." One crisp evening, with the sky burning orange and pink, Ethan asked a nurse to wheel him out to the hospital courtyard. There, among the lilacs and poppies, he pulled a tiny box from his robe pocket with shaking fingers. Maggie gasped. Inside was a simple silver ring, a tiny diamond catching the last of the sunset. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes full of hope and love. "Margaret Foster, you made me better, stronger, happier. You're my whole damn life. Will you marry me?" Maggie pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming freely now. She nodded, sobbing. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan smiled, a real full smile that lit up his battered face. The nurse standing nearby clapped her hands, laughing through happy tears. And right there, under the hospital sky of Springfield, with the scent of lilacs and the soft beat of bird wings all around, they made their new promise. Back in her tiny rented room, Maggie slipped the ring off only for a second, to dry her hands after washing up. Then she slid it back on and smiled at it. It wasn't just jewelry, it was their vow, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse. till death do us part. And deep down Maggie knew, no matter how long or hard the road would be, they'd walk it together. A week before Ethan's discharge, he was already up and walking, though with a slight limp. Dr. Peterson joked that he'd never had a more stubborn patient. "You're charging back into life like a hippo into a watering hole," he laughed. Maggie threw together a tiny farewell party in the hospital cafeteria. Cupcakes, cheap soda in plastic cups, and a homemade "Welcome Home Ethan" banner. Nurses, techs, even the janitors came by to say goodbye. Ethan had become a favorite, the guy who joked, who fought, who never gave up. When their beat-up Toyota rolled out of the hospital parking lot, Ethan leaned out the window and shouted, "Look out, world! We're back, baby!" Maggie laughed harder than she had in months, a bright, unfiltered laugh full of light. Their first night home, Ethan, still a little wiped out, crashed on the couch. Maggie brought him his favorite pizza, pepperoni and pineapple, even though she absolutely hated pineapple. They curled up together, watching old Friends reruns, talking over the characters' lines like they were part of the show. Life wasn't perfect. It wasn't guaranteed. It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes scary as hell. But it was real. And they were in it, together. If someone had told Maggie a year ago that the happiest morning of her life would start with the smell of burnt toast and spilled coffee, she would have just laughed. But now, watching Ethan standing at the stove in his old New York Giants t-shirt, she thought, this is it. This is real happiness. He was trying to cook breakfast on his own, even though his right arm still ached from the fracture. The toast was way overdone. The eggs were a little crispy around the edges, but Maggie ate every bite, laughing and saying, "Best breakfast I've ever had." Ethan, pretending to adjust an invisible tie, grinned, "I'm a master chef, just super humble about it." They were building a new life together, brick by brick. The wedding was set for 2 months out. They didn't want anything fancy, just a small ceremony in the garden of an old church not far from their house in Massachusetts. A few close friends, a handful of family, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and a soft breeze. Maggie was sewing her own dress, simple, white, with lace details along the sleeves. On her morning runs, she'd peek into antique shops, hunting for the perfect jewelry. Ethan handled the invitations, handwritten on craft paper, each one tucked with a tiny dried flower. Every evening, they sat out on the porch with mugs of lemonade, going over the details. What songs they should play? Who would hold the rings? How to decorate the arch with fresh flowers? Everything felt so real, so right, until the past came knocking. It happened on a Friday. Maggie came home from work. She'd gotten a job at a small indie bookstore, dreaming of opening one herself someday, and found Ethan sitting on the front steps, a stack of papers in his hands, a weird look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, feeling that awful knot tighten in her chest. Without a word, Ethan handed her an envelope. The letter was from a law firm. Their past, the one they'd almost left behind in the whirlwind of healing and hope, had finally caught up. The trucking company that owned the rig that hit Ethan was suing him. Their lawyers were claiming Ethan was at fault, that he had crossed into another lane, causing the accident. If the court sided with them, Ethan could be on the hook for insane medical bills, damages, and legal fees. Maggie read the letter 3 times, refusing to believe it. "But we have proof," she burst out. "There's camera footage, police reports." Ethan lowered his head. "Maggie, some of the footage, it's gone. And the company's lawyers are saying our report is incomplete." The silence on the porch was deafening. Somewhere down the street, neighbors were grilling barbecue, the scent of roasted corn hanging in the air. A dog barked in the distance. But for Maggie, the whole world just stopped. They didn't sleep that night. They sat on the living room floor, cuff papers spread out around them, combing through every line of the letter. Ethan kept flipping through his old medical files, glancing over at her with a look that shattered her heart. "I promised you a fresh start," he said hoarsely, "and now I'm dragging you back into a mess." Maggie wrapped both hands around his and said, her voice steady, "We're in this together. You're my life, not some lawsuit, not the debt, not the fear. You." The next morning, they started fighting back. Maggie reached out to an old family friend, Frank Miller, a retired lawyer and Gulf War vet, known for being tough as nails. Frank met them at a little cafe downtown, under a peeling sign that read, "Best Pancakes in Town." He was short, stocky, with graying hair at his temples, wore a beat-up leather jacket, and drank black coffee like it was water. "All right, kids," he said, skipping the small talk. "You ready to throw down?" Ethan looked at Maggie. She nodded. "We're ready." Frank didn't sugarcoat anything. "It's gonna get ugly. They've got deep pockets and the best sharks in New York. But truth's still on your side." He laid out a plan: find every possible witness, recover the missing footage, run a full, independent inspection on Ethan's car. "It's gonna cost you, maybe everything you've got. You ready for that?" Without hesitation, Ethan said, "Yeah, we're ready." And Maggie knew, behind that determination wasn't just fear for himself. It was the drive to protect their future, and she was right there with him. All the way. If anything, it meant even more now, a symbol of the fight they refused to lose. When Maggie hung strings of lights around the church garden, when Ethan and his buddies hammered together the wooden arch for the ceremony, when they practiced their vows under the crackling sound of an old porch radio, they knew. This love was bigger than fear. Then, in the thick of wedding prep, came a glimmer of hope. Frank found someone. Susan Carter, a clerk from a gas station near the crash site, had kept her own surveillance footage, suspicious of the company's lawyers, and she was willing to testify for Ethan. For the first time in weeks, Maggie broke down and cried, but this time from pure, overwhelming relief. That night, they sat in the backyard under a sky full of stars. Ethan held her close, every part of him wrapped around her. "We're gonna make it," he whispered. Maggie, resting her head against his shoulder, smiled and whispered back, "Yeah, because we've got the only thing that really matters." "What's that?" She tilted her face up to him, eyes shining. "We've got each other." The morning was thick and heavy, like molasses. Even the air felt sticky and sluggish, as if nature itself knew today would decide their future. Margaret Foster stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of her light blue blouse. Her fingers trembled, and not from the rushed coffee she gulped down earlier. On the nightstand lay a crumpled note, written in Ethan's messy handwriting just last night. "We've got this." She slipped it into the pocket of her jeans, like a lucky charm. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Frank Miller, their lawyer, had insisted they show up early. No room for mistakes today. In the parking lot outside the courthouse downtown, a few cars were scattered around. A beat-up van marked law offices of Cartwright and Smith, and a couple of familiar faces from Maggie's bookstore job. Susan Carter, their star witness, was waiting across the street at a diner, clutching a paper cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. She looked like she might bolt any second. And Maggie understood. Going up against a big corporation in America was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. But Susan stayed. And Maggie felt a wave of gratitude so fierce, it almost made the world seem a little less heavy. The courtroom was stifling. Old portraits of judges in heavy black robes lined the walls. Maggie watched Ethan take a deep breath before pushing open the massive oak door. Across the aisle sat the company's legal team. 3 of them, all sharp suits and sharper looks, flipping through their tablets and case files. One of them, a thin, wiry guy in his 50s with a razor-sharp jawline, shot Ethan a look like he'd already won. Frank was the first to speak. His opening was short but hit like a hammer. "My client is a man whose life was wrecked by the negligence of this company. Now they're trying to flip the script and blame the victim, just to save themselves. But today, the truth speaks louder." When Frank finished, Maggie felt something crack open inside her. A flood of hope she hadn't dared let herself feel until now. The first 2 hours dragged on like a bad dream. The company's lawyers went on the attack, questioning Ethan's version of the crash, twisting the smallest details, hinting that maybe Ethan wasn't so careful after all. But Ethan held steady. Every time his confidence started to waver, he found Maggie's eyes across the room. She'd nod, just a little. "I'm here. You're not alone." Then came the game changer. The surveillance footage Susan had kept safe. When the judge gave the nod, they played it. The room went dead silent. Clear as day, the company's truck could be seen crossing the double yellow line and smashing into Ethan's car. No questions, no doubt. Frank didn't even bother to add a closing comment. He just shut off the screen, turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, we move for immediate dismissal. No liability on my client's part." The defense team scrambled, tossing out motions, begging for delays, asking for more time to review the evidence. But the judge, a silver-haired man with a tired face, just sighed, "Enough." He took off his glasses, looked at Ethan, and said, "Case dismissed. Full liability rests with the defendant." That was the first time Maggie allowed herself a real smile. Ethan turned to her, his eyes glassy. He was 2 seconds from breaking. They wrapped each other up right there in the middle of the courtroom, ignoring the dirty looks from the corporate suits and the whispers around them. This was their win. Hard-earned, deserved. The wedding happened a week later. They didn't push the date, not after everything they'd fought through. The warm evening air smelled like lilacs and fresh-cut grass. Friends and neighbors gathered in the little church garden, dressed in breezy linen shirts and sundresses. Ethan stood under the wooden arch they'd built by hand, covered in wildflowers, wearing a light tan suit, no tie, no fancy frills, just holding a simple gold ring between his fingers. Maggie walked toward him down a narrow aisle lined with smiles and teary eyes. Her dress, the same one she'd stitched together over late-night cocoa, floated around her in the soft breeze. When their eyes met, the whole world just fell away. Their vows were simple, honest. Ethan's voice was steady as he held her hand. "I promise to love you, through every fight, through every sunrise, until my last breath." Maggie's voice shook, but her heart was sure. "I choose you, today, and every day I'm given." As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, the first stars appeared overhead. And right there, surrounded by the smell of lemon pie, the sound of kids laughing, and the soft crackle of the old radio playing on the porch, they knew every fight, every scar, every broken night had been worth it. Their love had passed the only test that mattered, the test of life. 3 years had passed since that sunny day in the garden. Maggie always remembered their wedding as the first page of a new life, light but full of meaning, like a song hummed on the way home. Ethan had fully recovered. The scars on his body had become part of his story, and the pain, a memory that no longer had the power to control him. He found a job at a local antique furniture restoration shop, a place where every piece of wood had a soul, and no one was ever in a hurry. As for Maggie, after years of office work, she opened a little bookstore on the corner of Roosevelt Street. A tiny shop with wide windows, soft light, and the aroma of coffee brewing on an old machine behind the counter. And on the sign, in gold letters, it read, "The second chapter, bookstore and coffee." Life moved along quietly, but there was something more. Every morning, when Maggie opened her eyes and saw Ethan bent over her breathing softly, she felt a little flutter in her chest, like she was afraid that one day it would all disappear, like a dream. One spring day, a letter arrived. On the thin, white envelope were just 2 lines. "Miss Margaret Foster. Personal." When she opened it, inside was a note from Susan Carter, the same one who had helped them at trial. Susan was inviting them to an awards ceremony in a neighboring town. She was being honored for her civic bravery. "Without your help, Meg," she wrote, "I wouldn't have had the courage to tell the truth. You're the reason I believed in myself." Maggie pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes filling with tears, not from sadness, from realization. They hadn't just changed their own fate. At the ceremony, Susan was glowing. In the local veterans center, people from all over the town had gathered. It smelled of fresh pastries, coffee, potted plants, and new paint. American flags decorated the walls, and soft 60s music played in the background. When Susan took the stage, Ethan squeezed Maggie's hand. "You realize what you've done?" he whispered. Maggie blushed. She'd never been taught to brag. She grew up in a family where any achievement was taken calmly. Did the job? Forget it, it's just your duty. But that evening, when Susan told their story in front of a packed room, Maggie allowed herself for the first time to believe. Sometimes, a good deed really can change the world. Life picked up speed again. The business was booming. The bookstore became a local hotspot. Kids came for comics, older men for old fishing magazines. Young mothers picked up novels to read while swinging on their porches. Ethan worked at the shop, But in the evenings, he built something of his own, crafting new furniture for Maggie's store. Oak shelves, cozy armchairs, a little coffee corner by the window. They were building their life with their hands. Literally. One ordinary Tuesday, as the day was fading into dusk, Maggie came home to find Ethan on the porch. He was sitting on the wooden rocker, their old beagle Sammy, napping at his feet. On Ethan's lap was a small blue envelope. When he saw her, he smiled like a kid. "Looks like our adventure's still going." Inside the envelope was the test result. Maggie was pregnant. They laughed, cried, and danced right there on the old porch boards, under the first stars and the cool evening breeze. Ethan kissed her belly, whispering, "You're going to be the best mom in this town." Maggie stroked his hair and thought about how, maybe, sometimes life doesn't give you what you want, but what you actually need. Time passed. On the walls of their home, a collection of children's drawings grew. Under tables, toy cars and dolls rolled around, and in the corners stood books, thousands of them, like bricks in the foundation of their shared world. Maggie and Ethan often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, holding hands. They knew happiness wasn't the absence of storms, it was the ability to weather them together. One day, while watching the sunset, Ethan quietly said, "If tomorrow never comes, I want you to know, every second with you was my eternal yes." Maggie turned to him, hugged him tighter, and whispered, "You're my most beautiful if." And somewhere deep inside she knew, no matter what happened tomorrow, they would always have this moment. And that was enough. More than enough.